Welcome to Algebra 2-2, Unit 10, 7b. Let's take it out so that you can, so that you can see which page I'm on. I'm on page 1, right at the beginning. And today we're going to focus in on stretching and shrinking. We're going to do that section today. So go ahead and turn to page, you numbered these last time. If you didn't watch the first video, go back and watch it. Let's go to page 8 with the square root functions. This is our parent function in square roots, if you remember right. When we plug values into this equation, we get this parent function. We always compare back to parent functions. So today what you're going to do is you're going to find out stretches and shrinking. So we're going to be looking at the parent function and then doing number 2 and number 3 in each section, because again, just like you found out with reflections, it's a pattern. Okay, it's a pattern. In math, it's always patterns. So it's the same process, each type of problem. Just get used to the process. Here we go. So we look at this, whoops, let me get the whole thing in here. We look at this parent function. What we did, I'll just remind you from the first video, is we plugged the values given by the independent variable here on x. We would plug that value in for the x, calculate out, and put the answer right here. So this is parent function values. This is the graph. Now let's go over and do this with a number out in front. So this time we still plug in that -4 into the square root. What value do we get? Square root of -4. If we look back up to our previous work, we see we said that was undefined. Why is that? Hopefully you remembered that you can't have two identical factors that multiply to equal a negative. So again, our negative numbers are undefined. We don't even get to where we get to multiply that 1/2 yet. So now let's go to 0. Square root of 0 is 0, times 1/2 would be 0. Square root of 1 is multiplied by 1/2. Square root of 1 is 1, multiplied by 1/2 is 1/2. Square root of 2, again, you can grab a calculator and do that. It's about 1.4. Half of that would be 0.7. Square root of 4, that's another nice one. Square root of 4 is 2. Half of 2 is 1. Plot these, and let's take a look at what has happened from the parent graph. So we have 0. At 1, it's 1/2. At 1, it's 1/2. So we're going to go over to 1 and go up to about 1/2. At 2, it's 0.7. So it barely goes up from there. At 4, it's 1. So we have that graph there. Look at that comparatively to this parent graph. What do you notice about the distance from that x-axis up to that arrow and the x-axis to that? It looks to me as though it's gotten smaller, and in math we refer to that as shrinking. So we say it shrinks by factor of 1/2. The reason we say it shrinks by a factor of a half is because you're actually multiplying by the half. Factors multiply. So now think about that. If we put a 2 out front and we're multiplying it, that would be by a factor of 2. What do you think will happen to these parent graph numbers if we have a factor of 2 out front? If you said you think that it's going to stretch or it's going to get farther from the x-axis, you're correct. Let's do that right now. Okay. You can either look up above or you can calculate it on your own right now, plugging it in. -4, square root of -4 is undefined. Square root of -2 is undefined. Square root of -1 is undefined. Square root of 0 is 0 times 2 is 0. Square root of 1 is 1 times 2 is 2. Square root of 2 is 1.4 times 2 is 2.8. And square root of 4 times 2, well, square root of 4 is 2 times 2 is 4. If we graph these, all the undefineds we can't graph, then we get to 0. Then we go 1, 2, so we go over 1 and up 2. Then we go 2, 2.8, so 2 and up to 2.8. 4 and up to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it gets real stretched, a lot further from the x-axis in this one compared to our parent graph. Look at how close this arrow tip at 4 is to the x-axis compared to this one. That is called stretch. Stretches by factor of 2. Okay? So, we're going to see these patterns today. Stretches by a factor of 2. So now I want you to turn from page 8 to page 10. Well, on page 10, here's our parent graph. We are going to multiply that parent graph values by 1/2. Think back to what happened on the previous page when we took the square root and we multiplied it by 1/2. Do the same thing with these values. So if we look at this first value, -3, half of 3 is, take $3. Half of $3 would be 1.5 or 1.5. So we've got a -1.5. Half of 8, or I mean half of 2, which was your value here, would be a -1. Half of the answer to this, well, we can even do it this way. What's the cube root of -1? -1. Half of that would be a -1/2. Cube root of 0 is 0. 0 times a half is 0. Cube root of 1 is 1. Half of 1 is a half. Cube root of 8 is 2. Half of 2 is 1. And then to 27, the cube root of 27 is 3. Half of 3 is 1.5. Take a look again at your graph from the last page. This graph, what happened here, when we plugged in the points, it shrinks down to the x-axis, shrinks by that factor of a half. Guess what, guys? This is a pattern. So what's going to happen to this graph? It's going to draw closer to that x-axis. When you graph this, go ahead and pause it and graph it. We'll plug in 0, 0, then 1 is at a half, negative 1's at a half. So we get a curve down like that and over like this. Take a closer look at that. Again, we see that it shrinks by 1/2. So now look back at the last page on the square roots. You should be seeing a pattern here. On the square roots, the parent graph, and then we come down to this 2 out front, and it's stretched by a factor 2. It got away from the x-axis. So now let's see what happens in the cube root. If we put that 2 in front of a cube root, well, the first thing we could do is take our values up here. Realize you're going to have the same values from that part of our function, and we're just multiplying them by 2. Or you can plug these in and work it clear out. Okay? So let's do that together. So we take the first value is -3 multiplied by 2 would be a -6. Second value from your parent function up above is -2. Multiply it by 2, it would be -4. Third value, or the cube root of -1 is -1 times 2 is -2. Cube root of 0 is 0 times 2 is 0. Cube root of 1 is 1 times 2 is 2. Cube root of 8 is 2. Multiplied by 2 is 4. Cube root of 27 is 3. Multiplied by 2 is 6. Pause the video and graph that. You should have come out with a graph similar to this. It's stretched very far from the x-axis compared to its parent function, and it is actually stretched by a factor of 2 because of that 2 out in front. Okay? I want you at this point to stop the video and go ahead and apply this pattern to doing number 2 and 3. Whoops. Go ahead and apply these patterns for shrinking and stretching to the parent function on page 12 in number 2 and in 3. Calculate out your numbers in your tables as well as what happens to the graph. And then I want you to also do it for the exponential function on page 14. I need you to do that one as well. And then on page 16, do number 2 and 3 as well. Now on 16, that may cause some frustrations, so don't feel like you need to do that at home. You can come into class and finish that one up with me. Thank you very much. That is the end of the stretching and shrinking, stretching and shrinking videos. And our next will be shift happens. Okay? Thank you very much.